Hello and welcome to the Care Advisor Accreditation Programme. This presentation is part of the Benefits for Later Life series and covers personal independence payment. The aims are to provide an overview of PIP, helping advisors to understand the application and assessment criteria so they can identify potential entitlement and explain how and when this may apply and where to go for help and support throughout the process. The introduction of PIP was part of a much wider welfare reform for people of a working age. Introduced by the Welfare Reform Act of 2012, it replaced disability living allowance for eligible claimants between 16 years old and 64 from the 8th of April 2013, and it was rolled out in stages over several years from April 2013. In 2012, there were over 3 million DLA claimants in the UK, and the government estimated that 600,000 fewer disabled people would qualify once PIP was rolled out, and the rollout was completed in 2018. By the end of 2018, all DLA claimants affected should have been through the PIP application and assessment process. Like DLA, PIP is non-means tested and it's non-taxable. It's a benefit for working age people with a long-term illness or disability, so it doesn't affect children under 16 who would still apply for DLA, or adults who are already 65 on the 8th of April 2013 and in receipt of DLA. They will continue to receive DLA even after their 65th birthday. The disability benefit you receive will depend on your age at the time you claimed it, so someone won't automatically move on to attendance allowance when they reach their 65th birthday, and of course you can only receive one disability benefit at a time. So for example, a claimant can't receive DLA and PIP, or attendance allowance and DLA. DLA claimants who weren't children or 65 already in April 2013 will have or be invited to make a claim for PIP, and this will have to be complete the application and assessment process. This is an example of one of the invitation letters that was or may still be sent. And remember, this is not an automatic transfer process onto PIP, and an application must be made. You must be aged 16 to 64 and have a health condition or disability that means you have difficulty with daily living or getting around, or both, for at least 3 months, and expect these difficulties to continue for at least another 9. Special rules will apply though for people with a short life expectancy when the qualifying period doesn't apply, and that will be identified during the initial stages of a PIP claim. You must have lived in England, Scotland or Wales. There are different rules for Northern Ireland, for at least 2 or out of the last 3 years, and be in one of those countries when you apply. There are additional rules if you live abroad or if you're not a British citizen. So for example, if you are a member of the armed forces or a family member of the armed forces. Whether an illness or disability is physical and sensory, whether it's mental or cognitive, intellectual, or any combination of impairment on a functional ability, PIP's intended to make a contribution towards the extra costs that someone may face to help them lead full, active and independent lives. The assessment considers how an illness or disability affects a person rather than the condition they have or a medical diagnosis. It has 2 parts, so the daily living component for help with everyday life and a mobility component for help with getting around. And you can be awarded either the daily living component or the mobility component on its own, or indeed both components at the same time. Each one has two different rates of payment, a standard rate or an enhanced rate. You might be more familiar with lower and higher, but PIPs refers to standard or enhanced. The rate that you're paid depends on whether your ability to carry out daily living or mobility activities is limited or severely. This differs from DLA and attendance allowance, as there is no day or night time criteria for PIP, as there is with attendance allowance and disability living allowance. This next slide shows the comparison of the rates between DLA and PIP, and it clearly shows the loss of the lower rate for the care component of disability living allowance, and this is where the estimated 600,000 fewer people that are eligible for PIP have been most affected. Before we look at the 12 descriptors, it's important to consider the additional, in addition how these tasks are carried out. Can a person perform these activities safely, so in a way that's unlikely to cause harm? The DWP must consider whether there's real possibility of harm occurring that can't be ignored, considering the nature and the gravity of the harm in question. Can they be carried out to an acceptable standard, so a standard that's good enough? So an example of not completing a task to an acceptable standard would be if you could wash yourself, but you don't realise that you've done so inadequately and so are still not clean once you've finished. Can you do it repeatedly, so being able to repeat the task as often as required? So for example, if you're able to prepare breakfast without help, but the exhaustion from doing this meant that you can't prepare another meal, you should be treated as being unable to prepare a meal unaided. And that's because it's reasonable to expect someone to be able to prepare more than one meal a day. Can it be done in reasonable time? No more than twice as long as the maximum amount of time that it would take a person without a physical or mental condition to normally complete that task. PIP's points related benefits. It's based on your ability to perform a range of tasks under 12 activities, activity headings. 10 of these descriptors relate to daily living needs, care components, as we would refer to them as with disability living allowance, and 2 are mobility descriptors. The number of points that you score will determine whether or not you're entitled to that component, and if so, which rate. So if you were awarded 8 points, you would be awarded the standard rate. If you accumulate 12 points, then you would receive the enhanced rate. And so, for example, you could have the standard rate for the daily living tasks or the care component, and you could get the enhanced rate for mobility and vice versa, or just receive the daily living activity component or indeed the mobility, determined by the number of points that you're awarded. And this is the table of the daily living tasks or activities used in an assessment and the points that they may be awarded. Points are awarded that are cumulative, so any points awarded for eating or drinking would be added to the points awarded for difficulty with dressing or undressing. Slide 13 shows a breakdown for the descriptor preparing food, and how the number of points awarded may differ according to the ability to perform the task or activity. Each of the tasks have a range of points that may be awarded from 0 up to 6 or 10, 8, 10 or 12. For variable and fluctuating conditions, a descriptor will apply to you if it reflects your ability for the majority of days, so over 50%. And this is considered over a 12-month period, looking back 3 months and forward for 9 months. Where one descriptor is satisfied on over half of the days in that period, that descriptor will apply. If 2 or more descriptors are satisfied on over half of the days, the descriptor which scores the highest number of points will apply. And if somebody's awaiting treatment or further intervention, it can be difficult to accurately predict its level of success or whether it will even occur, and descriptor choices should therefore be based on the likely continuing impact of the health condition or impairment is if any other treatment or intervention hasn't occurred. There are two mobility descriptors, and either can score up to 12 points, which would award an enhanced rate. Remember that 8 points would mean a standard rate payment. The first is planning and following a journey, and that's for someone who can't follow a route of a familiar journey without another person, an assistance dog or an orientation aid. The second is moving around, and this has two types of difficulty. Either a person can stand and then move for more than a metre, but no more than 20 metres, and that would be aided or unaided, or they can't stand or move more than a metre. The recent news relates to the mobility part of PIP. In March 2017, the regulations were changed so that the enhanced mobility award of PIP couldn't be made for someone who can't follow the route of a familiar journey without another person, unless it was for reasons other than psychological distress. That bit was added. But in December 2017, a High Court decision found that these changes were unlawful, and they ruled that that was blatantly discriminating against people with psychiatric problems, and it was a breach of their human rights. And so in January 2018, the Department of Works and Pensions announced that they wouldn't appeal that decision made in December 2017, and so that change to the regulations in March 2017 no longer applies. The process, PIP and the process. Well, the process has changed considerably. It's a new benefit. It doesn't have the same criteria as disability living allowance, remember. And the process begins with thinking about a claim. That might seem strange, but this step is here to remind you that you must consider the type of claim and the potential risks associated with applying to change an existing claim. So it may be that you are making a new claim, that somebody has never received or claimed disability living allowance, or it might be an existing disability living allowance claimant moving on to PIP, or in fact an upgrade application. The second stage would be making the claim, and this is usually the first step, and most commonly or usually done by phone. Paper claims can be made, but only really in exceptional circumstances. The initial information required to make a claim for PIP will be basic information, and that will cover things: the claimant's personal and contact details, residency details, so residency and presence tests, the relevant period spent in hospital or residential care, claims under special rules for somebody who's terminally ill, and then the payment details, bank account details, and a summary of the main illnesses and disabilities. An advisor can support a claim at this stage, but the claimant must be present, or that person must be the Department of Works and Pensions appointee, or an attorney, or a Court of Protection deputy. The third stage, telling your story, this is where the form filling comes in. So this is the how your disability affects you form will be sent out, and this is the meat on the bones, the opportunity to provide a bigger picture of how an illness or disability affects the claimant and any additional evidence. The assessment, this is where the stages of the process completely change. There will usually be a face-to-face interview with a medical practitioner, and that's very often, it can be a physiotherapist, it could be an occupational therapist, it could be a registered nurse. Most people will have to attend one of these, and it's a very different part of the application process compared to DLA or attendance allowance. If you're supporting someone who wouldn't be able to attend one of these interviews or assessments, then you must seek permission. Wait for that permission to be granted and be prepared to submit some medical evidence to on request before just Please don't don't advise your client, your claimant, not to turn up because they're not able, because essentially that will stop the process, and their benefit process will completely stop. And remember, we're not transferring straight from one benefit to the other, so we must get confirmation that acceptance has been agreed, that the person doesn't attend an interview or an assessment if they're not able. That assessment will then go forward to the Department of Works and Pensions. They'll marry up all of the evidence that they have, and the decision will be made and sent out. You have, of course, a right to appeal the decision, but please do bear in mind that you can only make an appeal on a decision once you have made a mandatory reconsideration request. So you must have the Department of Works and Pensions must have had the opportunity to have another look at that decision before you can then go forward and make the appeal request. So it's usually a month's time limit. That can be extended in exceptional circumstances. Those are few and far between, so please try and be aware of those time limits. Check the decision letter, and the date of the decision will be at the top. Remember, you can't appeal a decision that hasn't been made, so if you haven't had sight of that decision, or you're not sure that a decision's come back, request a copy, and it may be advisable at that point to request a written statement of reason, because that may provide some clarity or give you extra time to gather further evidence. Evidence is absolutely vital to a successful outcome. So to put a bit more of a practitioner experience on this, to give it more of a practical feel, just to look at a case study to see how it might apply to an individual. This example is a lady, Sophie. She's 45 years old. Sophie's married with 2 children, and she works full-time. She has done for the last 18 years. Sophie's been diagnosed with early onset dementia. For the last 6 months, she's needed some support to remain working and to manage her daily living tasks. She's finding daily living tasks more and more difficult. She needs some support. She needs prompting and reminding to start and complete most daily living tasks, the cooking, eating, drinking, waking and getting ready for work, particularly. She finds those particularly stressful. She does need some support while she's at work to fulfill her normal working duties as well. So the question is, can Sophie claim personal independence payment? Yes, of course she can. She's an eligible working age. She's living in the UK, and she has an illness, or she's living with early onset dementia. She has an illness or disability that impairs her ability to perform her daily living tasks, and possibly even her mobility. It doesn't matter that she's working, which is why we've chosen this case study. It doesn't matter that you are working. This benefit is for somebody who is of a working age, to support them with the additional needs that they may have, and working is a very important part of that person's life potentially. It's also important to remember that there may be other benefit entitlement for this family, and there could also be support for them from the local authority, from the NHS, and from a voluntary group or from a charity. So we've only taken a very small picture of one very specific benefit here. There's a much wider picture to be considered for this lady and her family. So to summarise with some key points, PIP is not means tested. It's for people of a working age who are living with an illness or a disability that affects their ability to perform daily tasks or activities. There's a qualifying period, but special rules apply for those people who are living with short life expectancy. And for people who are funding their own care, may be able to continue to receive the care component, but if the local authority or the NHS are paying for their care, this may well affect that payment, and it can be very specialised advice that you may need support with. A claimant can't continue to receive DLA and PIP, or PIP and AA, or DLA and PIP, as I said. It's one or the other. So be very clear with somebody with that advice, because that can be quite misleading. It can be quite confusing. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that that's been a useful refresher or an insight into one of the main disability related benefits, and that you feel a bit more equipped to provide information and advice on PIP to those who rely on your services. If you'd like to find out more about the Care Advisor accreditation or about becoming a professional member of the Care Advisor network, then please do get in touch. And in the same way, if you have any questions, please do get in touch with us.